It began with receipts, numbers stacked higher than any ordinary life could explain. Millions charged by a single customer. Her name was Zamira Hajieva, not a celebrity, not royalty. Yet in just 10 years, she became Harrods' most notorious client. The bills told the story. In 1 month, she could spend more than most households earned in a lifetime. By the time investigators finished counting, the total was staggering. Over £16 million inside one store. But this wasn't just shopping. Behind the handbags, the jewelry, and the wine was money no one could trace.
70% goes to the government. What happens to the other sort of 29% or so? What happens to that? Do you know?
Money that would spark the UK's first major test of its new McMafia laws. And a question that mattered far beyond Harrods. How did a woman with no clear income spend like this in London without anyone asking why? The spending was detailed and precise. Records showed £30, zero in one day at the store's luxury boutiques. £5.75 million across multiple jewellery departments. 160, zero at Harrods Cartier branch. At Boucheron, another 150, zero. It didn't stop there. A closer look revealed that 54 credit cards were linked to her name and used across her transactions. Each purchase fed into a mountain of receipts. Each card swipe added another figure to a growing pattern that no one had seen before. The loyalty card file grew longer with every visit. By the end, Harrods had logged more than 93 pages of transactions under her account. Investigators would later note that her loyalty points alone could have covered the cost of a family home. The details of her shopping painted a picture of scale. At the Harrods toy department, more than £200 and the wine cellar was another category. £800 was spent in a single purchase of vintage bottles. Then came the watches. Invoices showed over £300, zero spent on Cartier timepieces. For handbags, 100, zero at Fendi. For fashion, 30, zero at Christian Dior in one sweep. The list seemed endless. She bought 32, zero in luxury chocolates. She walked out of Harrods with diamond jewellery worth tens of thousands at a time. Bills showed £1.4 million spent across multiple visits to Harrods' fine jewellery room. Each number was undeniable. These weren't estimates. These were receipts, loyalty card scans, and precise entries tracked by the store's accounting system. The scale was shocking, not just because of how much she spent, but because of how quietly it was done. For a decade, the transactions slipped beneath the radar. To Harrods, she was just a valued client. To outsiders, she was barely noticed. Her biggest single-day bill came in at 150, zero in one shopping trip. She left with jewelry, handbags, and high-end fashion. For staff, it was routine. For her, it was only another afternoon. By 2016, the records showed more than 800 separate transactions linked to her. Every purchase was logged. Every item, no matter how small, carried a price tag that dwarfed ordinary living. Investigators later highlighted the sheer range of her shopping. Household items, garden furniture, rare wines, fine art, designer clothes, children's toys. Nothing was excluded. If it was sold inside Harrods, chances were she had bought it. The shock came not only from the figures, but from what they revealed. £16 million in one store, 54 credit cards tied to the account. A loyalty file that filled nearly 100 pages. Questions began to rise. Who was this woman? How did she have such limitless access to money? And why had no one asked until the numbers became too large to ignore? For years, Harrods staff smiled and carried her shopping bags. For years, receipts printed and transactions cleared. But in the end, it was those very receipts that pulled her life into the spotlight. This was no ordinary customer, and these were no ordinary bills. Zamira Hajieva was born in Azerbaijan. She grew up in a Soviet-controlled environment where privilege was rare. Her life changed when she married Jahangir Hajiev. He rose through Azerbaijan's banking system, eventually becoming chairman of the International Bank of Azerbaijan. With him, Zamira moved into a world of money and power. Jahangir controlled billions in assets as head of the state-owned bank. Allegations later claimed that he diverted public funds for personal use. His position gave the family wealth far beyond the reach of most citizens. While Azerbaijan's economy suffered, the couple lived in luxury. In 2016, Jahangir was convicted in Azerbaijan. He was sentenced to 15 years for fraud and embezzlement. Reports said the amount lost by the bank was more than £2.2 billion. The The trial exposed how state money had been drained. For the Hajiev family, it was the end of their official respectability. Zamira, however, was already settled in London. She had moved to the UK years before her husband's arrest. She lived in a mansion near Harrods worth £15 million. It became one of her main properties. She also had access to golf courses, high-end shops, and membership in elite clubs. The property purchase was not straightforward. The house was bought through a company registered in the British Virgin Islands. That company was linked to Zamira. Investigators later highlighted it as a key part of her unexplained wealth. Her spending habits drew more attention. She became known for her regular shopping trips to Harrods. Court papers later revealed the figures. More than £16 million was spent at the department store over a decade. Records showed payments using 35 different credit cards, many connected to the International Bank of Azerbaijan. Harrods staff knew her as a top client. She bought jewelry, perfume, designer fashion, and household items. Each transaction added to the mystery of her money. For the UK's national in 2018, Zamira became the first target of the UK's new Unexplained Wealth Orders, UWOs. The law was designed to investigate how foreign individuals acquired expensive UK assets. For the Hajieva case, it meant proving that her fortune came from legitimate sources. Her lawyers argued that her lifestyle was funded lawfully. They claimed Jahangir had been a successful criminal, but investigators pressed forward. They focused on the mansion near Harrods and the Berkshire Golf Club estate linked to her family. Both were worth millions. Both had ownership structures involving offshore companies. The lack of transparency raised suspicions. At the same time, Azerbaijan wanted Zamira returned. In 2018, a European arrest warrant was issued against her. Authorities in Baku accused her of being involved in financial acts alongside her husband. She was arrested in London. The court hearings in the UK were highly publicised. Journalists gathered outside as Zamira appeared in front of judges. For a woman who had once shopped in anonymity, the sudden exposure was dramatic. Every detail of her lifestyle was dissected. Her bail conditions were strict. She was forced to surrender her passport. She was required to wear an electronic tag. She could not leave her London home without approval. The image of her standing before magistrates contrasted sharply with her luxury past. Her children were also drawn into the case. Reports mentioned that her daughter and son benefited from the family wealth. The son was linked to property dealings. The daughter's education and lifestyle were supported by the same funds. The web of privilege extended beyond Zamira. Public opinion in the UK grew harsher. Critics argued that London had become a safe haven for foreign elites hiding stolen wealth. Zamira became a symbol of that criticism. For ordinary people, her Harrods spending illustrated inequality in its starkest form. The pressure on the courts increased. If Zamira won, it would weaken the effectiveness of the new law. If she lost, it would show that the UK could challenge suspicious foreign money. Her case became a test for the entire system. As the hearings continued, more details of Jahangir's role emerged. Prosecutors pointed to his 15-year sentence in Baku. They stressed that his wrongdoings had drained Azerbaijan's public funds. They linked Zamira's UK properties directly to that stolen money. The contrast was striking. In Azerbaijan, Jahangir sat in prison. In London, Zamira fought to keep her wealth. For the families who had suffered in Azerbaijan's collapsing economy, the case stirred anger. The gap between the wealthy elite and struggling citizens could not have been clearer. Even as she denied wrongdoing, Zamira's image in the press was fixed. She was portrayed as the woman who spent millions in Harrods while her husband's country faced poverty. It was a story of excess, privilege, and global corruption. The legal battle, however, was not over. Appeals and challenges followed each ruling. Zamira's lawyers argued that her rights were being violated. They insisted she had no direct role in her husband's corruption. But investigators believed the evidence told another story. By this stage, Zamira Hajieva was no longer anonymous. Her name became permanently tied to the debate over dirty money in London. For her, the mansion was no longer a private home. It was a symbol of scrutiny. For the public, it became the face of unexplained wealth. But how did it all start? What really happened? And if you find stories like this important, consider subscribing for more. Jahangir became the chairman of the International Bank of Azerbaijan in 2001. This position gave him power. It also gave him influence over billions in state-backed loans and international banking deals. His career lasted until 2015, but the consequences were devastating. Under his leadership, the bank collapsed. It was left with losses of more than £2.2 billion. This collapse hurt the economy of Azerbaijan and left ordinary people with fewer opportunities. While this was happening, Zamira's life shifted to London. She had access to large amounts of money. Authorities later alleged that the funds were misused bank loans. The money allowed her to live a lifestyle that shocked the public once it came to light. The couple purchased a house in Knightsbridge in 2009. The property was worth more than £11.5 million. They also bought a golf course in Ascot worth around £10.5 million. Both purchases later became the focus of investigations. In Azerbaijan, things changed for Jahangir in 2015. He was arrested that year. By 2016, he was convicted of fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of power. The court sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Officials accused him of misusing funds on a massive scale. The downfall of Jahangir immediately drew attention to Zamira. People asked questions about how her lifestyle in the UK had been funded. The spotlight grew brighter after the British press exposed her huge spending at Harrods. The UK introduced new legal powers in 2018. These powers were called unexplained wealth orders. They allowed investigators to target individuals suspected of owning assets beyond their known income. Zamira became the first person to face one. The case quickly became international news. Headlines highlighted her extravagant spending. The details shocked the public. Tens of millions had been spent without a clear explanation of the source. Investigators demanded answers. They wanted to know how she had funded the Harrods spending. They asked about the Knightsbridge home. They asked about the golf course. Each detail raised further suspicion. The UK's national agency argued that her wealth could not have come from legitimate sources. They connected it directly to her husband's corrupt activities in Azerbaijan. Zamira denied wrongdoing. She insisted her life in London was not based on illegal funds. The legal process in London was slow. Her lawyers fought against the order. Despite this, the court ordered her to explain how she acquired the properties. She resisted. The case dragged on for years. Every hearing brought more public attention. Her name became a symbol of the UK's new crackdown on hidden wealth. The phrase McMafia laws was often used by newspapers to describe the measures. The case was the first major test of those laws. At the same time, Azerbaijan was pursuing her. In 2018, they issued an extradition request. They wanted her returned to face questioning over fraud charges. She was arrested in London under the European arrest warrant system. The arrest shocked many. She was granted bail under strict conditions. She was required to wear an electronic tag. She had to remain at her Knightsbridge home. She was not allowed to leave the city without permission. The extradition hearings became another layer of her legal troubles. Her defense argued that she would not receive a fair trial if returned. They claimed the charges were politically motivated. They warned that her safety could be at risk in Azerbaijan. The court in the UK delayed the decision. It wanted to examine evidence about the fairness of trials in Azerbaijan. Zamira remained in London under surveillance and tied to her bail conditions. Her case was unprecedented. She had become the first high-profile figure in Britain to be targeted under new laws. The combination of Harrods spending, luxury homes, and an imprisoned husband made the story impossible to ignore. The hearings continued into 2019. She was allowed to remain in the UK while the courts reviewed the request. In the meantime, her properties and assets stayed frozen. Public anger grew. Many saw the case as proof that London had become a safe haven for illicit wealth. Politicians debated the issue. Commentators called for stricter laws. Zamira's name was central to that debate. By 2020, the legal battles had already stretched for years. There was no resolution, but the image of her as the woman who spent millions at Harrods remained fixed in the public mind. Her story had begun with her husband's rise in Azerbaijan. It then moved to London, where the spending spree unfolded, and it ended in courtrooms, with judges and lawyers arguing over the source of her fortune. The case was still unfinished, but the damage to her reputation was already permanent. The proceedings moved into the courtroom. By this stage, the unexplained wealth order had already placed Zamira Hajieva under international scrutiny. The hearings in London were about her spending, her lifestyle, and her refusal to account for how she paid for it. The High Court was clear. The national agency had presented records of spending, bank transactions, and property ownership. They highlighted her purchases at Harrods. They showed documents about her golf course. They presented evidence of her large properties in London and Berkshire. Each item demanded an explanation. Zamira did not provide one. She argued that the investigation was unfair. She claimed her spending was not unusual for wealthy individuals living in London. But the judges were not persuaded. The money trail was missing. The authorities believed the funds were linked to her husband's misuse of his position at the International Bank of Azerbaijan. The court process was slow, detailed, and heavily reported in the press. Reporters waited outside the hearings. Every appearance she made became front-page news. Cameras captured her walking past them in designer coats and sunglasses. Her lifestyle was being judged in public as much as in court. The national agency focused on her properties. They believed she had acquired them using wealth obtained through unlawful means. They worked through property law and financial investigation powers. It was the first serious test of the unexplained wealth order since the law had been introduced. Her lawyers challenged the process. They argued that the order violated her rights. They said it was unfair to force her to prove how her money was obtained. Normally, in an illegal case, the prosecution must prove wrongdoing. But in this civil process, the burden shifted. She had to prove her money was legitimate. This became a wider debate about fairness. Supporters of the law said it was necessary to stop dirty money flowing into the UK. Critics said it risked being used unfairly. But Zamira's case was now tied to this political and legal argument. She was the public example. The hearings dragged on for years. In 2018, she lost her first attempt to challenge the order. The judge ruled that there was enough evidence for her to explain her wealth. She appealed. In 2020, the Court of Appeal upheld the decision. Again, she was ordered to show the origins of her money. While the court battles continued, another problem emerged. Azerbaijan issued an extradition request for her. They wanted her returned to face questioning over her husband's case. The request was based on allegations of fraud and embezzlement. Zamira denied them. Her legal team argued that the request was politically motivated. The extradition hearings opened in Westminster Magistrates' Court. The proceedings looked at the prison conditions in Azerbaijan. They examined whether she would face a fair trial. Human rights lawyers raised concerns. In 2020, the judge blocked her extradition, ruling that sending her back would violate her rights. She remained in the UK, but the damage was permanent. She became known not as a wealthy socialite, but as the woman who symbolized unexplained wealth. The national agency continued to pursue her assets. Investigators kept pressing to recover properties they believed were linked to unlawful money. In 2020, the authorities secured the freezing of her properties. She could not sell or move them. The NCA pressed for recovery orders. They argued the properties were bought with funds tied to her husband's corrupt banking practices. The cases were complex, involving multiple appeals and challenges. At the same time, her name stayed in the headlines. Her Harrods spending became a shorthand in the media for excess. Commentators used it as proof of how London had become a playground for wealthy foreign elites, many with money of questionable origin. Her own defense never fully convinced the public. She said her life was private. She said she was being unfairly targeted. But the image of her walking through Harrods, of her homes worth millions, and of her refusal to disclose the source of her wealth made her an easy target. By the end of 2021, the pressure on her finances was intense. The UK's national agency described the case as a landmark. It showed that unexplained wealth orders could work. Even though Zamira had not been convicted of misconduct in Britain, her assets were under direct challenge. Her children also faced attention. Their names appeared in some of the property records. Investigators examined whether assets were held under their names to avoid detection. Family life was under public scrutiny in a way it had never been before. In Azerbaijan, her husband remained in prison until his passing. His downfall was tied directly to her troubles. His conviction had given the UK investigators the grounds to pursue her. His legacy was now linked to corruption, not banking success. The legal fight over her wealth is still not fully resolved. Appeals and hearings continue. Broader consequence was clear. After Zamira's case, the UK expanded its use of unexplained wealth orders. Other individuals linked to foreign governments, criminal networks, or financial scandals found themselves under investigation. She had been the test case, and the system continued. Her story ended not with prison but with restriction. She remained in Britain, but under constant legal pressure. Her money was frozen. Her assets were tied up in litigation. Her reputation was permanently changed. Her case showed that wealth without explanation carried consequences. Not prison, but public judgment. Not exile, but scrutiny that followed her wherever she went.